Symposium with Ash Aulak.
Hi guys, welcome back to the film series from the Symposium. Delighted again to be joined by Jay, James and Gaurav. Today we're engaging with the broad question of what actually is a film. We'll start with things that you would immediately assume to be a film, but perhaps there are certain aspects of them which indicate that they're not. And then we'll do the converse. We'll look at things which are maybe at first glance not a film, not a part of cinema, but then there are strong arguments that maybe they should be considered part of cinema. So on the first section, Jay recently saw Hamilton on Disney Plus, the recording of the play. So yeah, Jay, if you'd just like to start and talk to us about it.
Hi, so for those of you who haven't heard of it, Hamilton it's a Broadway musical. It's been in New York for probably about 5 years now. And on Disney Plus, you can catch a recording of the original cast performing the show. So it's filmed over a period of 3 days. It's two audience productions, as well as one production without the audience, with the use of kind of more cinematic techniques such as Steadicam to kind of capture some of the more intricacies of the routines. I think what's interesting is I first heard that they were making a film of Hamilton in about 2017, which is actually after they filmed this. And obviously my initial expectation would be that they were going to do this, with huge sets and huge production values. But actually what they did was they just released a filmed version of the play. And I think this kind of got me thinking, because while I was watching the film, I actually thought, well, and I noticed I have said the word film. While I was watching this, I was thinking, wow, this is actually a really effective way to get across a musical into a film version, because I think when you see that it's on a stage and you see them performing in front of a stage, it almost feels kind of slightly less cringy, and you don't feel like they're just random people bursting into a song when they're trying to immerse you into kind of this environmental realness, which is what a lot of kind of film musicals try and do.
Is that your kind of own dislike of film musicals generally, perhaps clouding your opinion, just as a devil's advocate, just because a lot of people like those aspects of film musicals?
Yeah, but I do think to an extent I think it's requires kind of a greater sense of kind of suspension of belief when you've got, because I think, a large part of this construction of these huge epic sets is to convey a sense of realism. And then it kind of gets broken down the second someone starts, going into song and singing. And I think what Hamilton did here was, you can see that these people are in a theatre and you kind of accept it as these are the rules of the world of the theatre, rather than a film which kind of runs on the rules of the real world, if it's trying to look like the real world, if that makes sense. So I thought it was, an interesting approach, even if it was maybe just, an attempt by Disney to get this marketed to a broader audience. So I thought it was an interesting way of showing, the musical as a film.
So Jay, then do you think that says something interesting about the difference between stage and film, as perhaps one of the conflicts that we'll talk about?
Yeah, I do think there is a difference in the sense that I think, I've seen a lot of adaptations of, shows, and a lot of the time I don't necessarily think it works too well. And I think part of, what's good about Hamilton is the production values. I don't know if any of you actually watched it, but the production values of the show are quite impressive. There's this huge rotating stage and all of that. And I think for me, part of my enjoyment of the show, it wasn't so much the narrative. I thought, the narrative was maybe lacking a little bit, but I enjoyed kind of, appreciating the performance of these people on a stage, performing live, doing everything kind of, in one go, as it were. And I think that's something you get to appreciate when you go to a theatre. There's this kind of connection that you've got to this, to the actors and to the show, because you're experiencing it unfold in real time.
Mm.
And I thought that to an extent, it actually managed to do it quite well when you're watching it on your TV. There's still this element of, although obviously it's not one take and they're cut, it kind of feels like you're watching something that happens in one take.
Yeah.
And you kind of get that awe of, wow, these actors are incredible, that I don't know if you necessarily get when watching a film when they've had the chance to do this many, many times and, pick the best shot.
Yeah. No, I think that's interesting. James, what are your thoughts on how recorded plays fit into film, or just the relationship between stage and film? Because if you take a studio in a traditional film studio as a stage, the only real difference, it seems to me, is the production quality between a recorded play and a film and the existence of an audience. I mean, is it that fine? Is that fine a distinction? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I think, there is a thing called theatricality, right? So there is a level to which anything, be it a film, piece of art, can be theatrical. I mean, even a play can be not theatrical. To me, when people started talking about this Hamilton thing, as if, is it a film, is it not? I thought it was a bit of a meme. Like, I thought it was a bit, I didn't think that there was actually going to be a serious divergence. But one of my friends put up a poll. Most of the people that follow him are film students because he went to film school. And it was overwhelmingly the case that they voted that this Hamilton was not a film, which I thought was kind of strange. So I thought about it. And I thought about what is the actual difference, if there is a difference between, a film stage production and a film. And then I thought about this film called Dogville by Lars von Trier, which is filmed on a soundstage, made to look like a soundstage. And the whole production design of the film is supposed to look excessively theatrical. So the only difference between Dogville and Hamilton, if there is a difference, is that Hamilton is usually seen in person, with actual people on the stage. And Dogville was never seen like that. It was only ever filmed. There was never an audience. And I don't really think the presence of an audience is really, a good way to differentiate between whether something is a film and something is theatre. As far as I'm concerned, if it's a filmed piece of narrative entertainment, it cannot be not a film.
Well, I mean, I think you're getting into muddy waters with the use of the word narrative there, which I'm sure we'll engage with later on.
Well, actually, I don't think I am, though, because I had to think before this podcast.
Right.
Name me one non-narrative film. Name me one. Just a single one. Doesn't exist.
Samsara.
No, first of all, I knew you were going to say Samsara, Jay. I knew you were going to say Samsara, so I prepared a fucking response. No, first of all, yeah, I mean, I get the Samsara Baraka thing, but Samsara clearly has some sort of narrative about human progress, about how we've lost our roots and we've moved away towards sort of mechanized. It's not. It's literally the whole point of the movie. It's a documentary. All documentaries have narratives. They all have points to make. A political message is still a narrative.
No, so for example, you've talked about The Clock, which is a kind of 24-hour film, which is kind of straddling a museum gallery versus cinema. So is just merely a succession, photos of a succession of paintings which are not even loosely connected, so that would therefore be not a film. But if the paintings have any kind of, although that's subjective, narrative connectivity, then it becomes a film.
The Clock can easily, what The Clock is it is clips from other films. It's a remarkable achievement. It's 24 hours long, and it's clips from a number of films, like hundreds of films, maybe thousands of films, right? And it tells the time. That's what it does. It tells the time. So it's shots of clocks, of people talking about times, etc., from other films. And whilst you're watching it, it's like the time in real time. I mean, what's the most basic narrative of all time, right? Is 1 to 2 to 3.
Yeah.
So I think we can easily subsume that there. My feelings with the Clock is more that there is sort of thought to be a dividing line between pieces of audiovisual work that you should show in a gallery and pieces of audiovisual work that you should show in a cinema, although there are filmmakers which straddle that line. I mean, in particular, Simon Liang, who's had some reasonably big films that a lot of film fans know about. He also releases most of his films, at least now, in a gallery setting instead of in a cinema setting. But it's a whole other question about whether that line demarcates the difference between fine art and film, or whether you can just say that films which are fine art are films.
Well, I mean, if it's the method of consumption which is the issue, i.e. gallery versus TV or cinema screen, then surely the film students you mentioned earlier, surely their objection to Hamilton maybe has some basis?
No, but it's not about the medium. It's about why you would choose that medium. You know what I mean? It's not that they're showing because you can show a movie in a gallery and it doesn't change things, right? mean, the first time I saw this Tsai Ming-liang film, Goodbye Dragging In, was in a gallery. It doesn't mean that it's not a film. It's more that what in the film would compel it to be shown in a gallery instead of in a cinema. Is there something about that film which makes it intrinsically different? To which I would say probably not.
All right. I mean, Gaurav, what are your thoughts, especially considering the difference between theatre and film? Because at school, I know you did as well. We both watched kind of Shakespeare adaptations, which were obviously plays, but then they were filmed they weren't recordings of stage in the Hamilton sense. They were like plays that had been put to film. They were in film studios with special effects, etc.
Yeah. Even on top of that, I remember I watched in the cinema the Royal Shakespeare Company production of Macbeth.
Right, and that was just a recording of the stage.
That was essentially just a recording of the stage.
Right.
They had multiple camera angles and, a bit of close-ups on who was speaking at various points. But it was, I haven't seen Hamilton, but I've seen a couple, scenes and parts of it, and it's nowhere near the level that Hamilton went towards, making it look a lot more film-like with its production value. Right. But I do agree with a lot of James said that really at the end of the day, if it's a sequential narrative of pictures in a row, then at the end of the day it is basically a film.
And if you record it as well,
record it. And if you want to say, I think because a lot of modern film, a lot of modern cinema is based on the fact that this is a released piece of material which will go into a cinema, people will pay to see it, it will generate some kind of money, and then it will be released on DVD, and that's what people count as a film. But really it doesn't have to go to the cinema. It could be released anywhere in any kind of form. But as long as it's filmed in some way with a camera, in my opinion, it counts as a film.
No, I think on those issues I would agree, just in the sense that, as I raised earlier, that the distinction of an audience being present and not, as James also echoed, is a bit of an arbitrary one. I mean, Jay, what would you like to say on Jay?
On the audience point?
Or just generally about the relationship between stage and film?
Well, I mean, you mentioned Shakespeare. Actually, a couple of months ago, I watched Fleabag. They released a filmed version of the play. I think it was from the Edinburgh Fringe. I might be completely wrong.
No, it wasn't. And she also performed it in London, and now she's done it in New York as well. But yeah, essentially the TV series of the play.
But the play of the TV series, you mean?
Yeah.
And I've got to say, it's kind of echoing what Gaurav said. If you compare the way Fleabag was filmed, I mean, I didn't think of it at the time. I didn't watch this and think I'm watching a film. I just thought I'm watching a filmed play. But when you watch something like Hamilton, they go into a lot of effort to kind of make it, very as cinematic as physically possible. It doesn't necessarily always work, but there's a lot of kind of inherently cinematic techniques involved in here. There are scenes where you've got a tracking camera following characters around the stage. You've got, seat cuts from behind the stage, in front of the stage, everything. Whereas Fleabag, it was kind of more or less a static camera for the whole show. But I mean, I would probably have to concede as well and say that Fleabag, for better or worse, probably is also qualifying on the line of a film because, I think it might be this arbitrary distinction between, I'd probably echo the overwhelming agreement that if it's a filmed production, it probably is, for all intents and purposes, a film, especially if it's meant to be consumed on a TV at home, in the same kind of way that we would watch a film.
Okay, James, I'd like to take what Jay said and then bring it to the idea that if it's a recorded sequential narrative piece, that it becomes a film. What is the distinction between the TV screen and the cinema screen then? What is the distinction between a TV show and a film? Is there a distinction? Should they be separated? Is it the fact that one of them is split up? Is it that you can watch one of them in one sitting? Is it that they're different lengths? So what are your thoughts on the difference between film and TV?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a much harder one than the Hamilton one. And I think Jay and I are in rough agreement about people's motivations regarding how we talk about TV series in relation to film. So the prime example, I guess, of the TV series, which people love to say is a film, is Twin Peaks: The Return. And there are a variety of reasons why people actually want to say it's a TV series. And I think they have little really to do with, the idea of what is a film and what is a TV series. People who are into film, or the film community, have a sort of sense of superiority about the art form. Like film is, it's the best art form, right? So TV is seen as inferior. So when something that Twin Peaks: The Return comes around, which is, just monumentally excellent, there are two reasons why they want to say it's a film. The first is that they don't want to concede something as good as Twin Peaks: The Return to TV instead of to film. And the second is that they want to take Twin Peaks: The Return and elevate it to the status of film, right? So one is they want themselves to be benefited, and the other is they want the material to be benefited. That said, I think around that time in 2017, a lot of interesting arguments were mooted to do with where we could draw the line. And that line was mainly drawn between people, who were saying that TV series have episodic structures. So, you have 10 episodes, and in each episode, you catch up with each of the characters, and there's sort of a pattern that emerges. It adheres to very TV-like structures as well, with overarching story plots disappearing and appearing. And the thing with Twin Peaks: The Return was that it didn't do that at all. There was no structure whatsoever. Characters would just disappear and reappear and vanish. And the whole thing, if you watched it all together as it just completely in 18 hours, you wouldn't be able to detect any sort of rhythm or any sort of repetition or any episodic structure at all. And I think a good comparison point was, I believe it came out last year, Nick Refn's Too Old to Die Young on Amazon, where the lengths of episodes vary wildly. I mean, some are over 2 hours and some are under half an hour, which just seems like he's made 18 hours of content and they've just arbitrarily split it up into consumable chunks.
Right.
So I guess that's more a list of issues than an answer. But for me, I mean, I'm happy personally to call some, there are films that are longer than Twin Peaks: The Return, even at 18 hours. I'm happy to call something which has no structure. That's a heavy term, but no episodic structure. I'm happy to say that's a film if it doesn't obey the constraints of the TV dramas. All the same, I don't necessarily think it matters too much. I think it's an arbitrary distinction.
No, I think I agree on the last point about it being arbitrary. I don't want to come back to Fleabag too frequently, but for me, it's an example of something that straddles the distinction, because each episode is less than 20 minutes, and there are, I think, 6 episodes per season, from memory anyway. And that means it's short. That means it's shorter than 3 hours. It's shorter than like a very consumable film like Lord of the Rings, or it's far shorter than most Bollywood films. And it like, for example, although it has some degree of episodic structure in the sense that you're talking about, James, it is quite cohesive, and you are able to watch it in a single watch and not feel like it's been split up unduly. I mean, Jay, what are your thoughts on this TV film distinction more broadly then, and even engage with Fleabag and Twin Peaks should you desire?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, the TV film distinction, because it's one of those things where I don't actually think it's physically possible to even attempt to kind of come up with a definition of the distinction, because as we've kind of said, there are so many grey areas. I've always heard this whole thing about Twin Peaks: The Return being viewed as an 18-hour film. David Lynch said it himself. I don't know if I entirely disagree with this whole episodic structure, or do I think that that's necessarily, the point of distinction. So just to give another example and throw one in here, there's Scenes from a Marriage by Ingmar Bergman. This is from the 70s. So it's a film. The original film's about 3 hours.
Yeah.
But there's also the extended version, which is also known as the TV version, which is 6 episodes, each episode being about 45 minutes each.
Right.
I watched the extended version, but at no point did I watch it thinking, I'm just watching a TV show. I thought I'm watching, just an extended film. And it sounds silly, but I kind of had this different mentality of approach when watching it. I wasn't thinking I'm watching a TV show. I thought I'm watching a film. This is Scenes from a Marriage. It's just the extended cut, and it just so happens to be split over, a couple of viewings. Because I think there are enough films out there where we kind of are quite happy. Lord of the Rings, it's 3 films. Most people would talk about it as if it's one whole film that we struggled together over as a 9-hour, a cohesive 9-hour work.
Yeah.
And I think there's it's hard to do this without being arbitrary, but I do think that there are certainly cases for certain things where you could probably make the argument that it is effectively a film. I think, or maybe Fleabag slightly harder because, actually no, I don't even think Fleabag is harder. I mean, realistically, the only difference between Fleabag and Twin Peaks, for example, is that Fleabag won a bunch of Emmys, and I don't think Twin Peaks won any.
Right.
And I guess maybe it almost reaches the point where this categorization might just be, does it qualify for an Emmy or does it qualify for an Oscar? And I think, I kind of add one more point. I think one other thing is, I certainly used to say this years ago, but if I was criticizing a film, one point I would often make was, it kind of feels like a TV movie, as if to kind of denote, that it was a lower quality.
So that's linked to what James said about the prestige in the cinema community.
But I think almost now, I think most people would agree that there's not even much of a blurring line in terms of quality. I mean,
definitely.
Yeah, if you watch something like, The Sopranos, Mad Men, these are very high quality shows with excellent production values, better than certain films out there today. I mean, I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone who thought the Room was a higher quality work than Sopranos simply because one was a film and one was TV.
Yeah,
but if you take the average aggregate of quality of mainstream cinema and mainstream television, because prestige TV is like a drop in the ocean, there is such a thing as a TV movie, and it looks like shit.
But I think, sorry, if I could just make one more final point. I think one I kind of came across this the other day was they were saying like how stuff like Netflix, because it's kind of changing the way we consume TV, where we've now got these kind of premium TV services where we pay for a subscription, they're kind of less reliant on adverts. And there was kind of this argument that a lot of the kind of drivel you see on stuff like ITV is just there basically to keep people's asses on seats so they can watch adverts.
Yeah,
that's where the money came from. Now that kind of the incentive is high quality shows which will bring people to come and watch it. And I think as we're kind of moving into the kind of streaming era away from network television, I think this idea of film be denoting a superior quality is kind of almost a dated concept at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to bring Gaurav in next, but I'd just like to say, I mean, James, it's interesting you say it's a drop in the ocean, just because I think since about the time of The Wire and then Game of Thrones, it's been we have an increasing number every year of high quality, very expensive TV shows, regardless of their quality, their frequency is increasing. And I think Jay is right to point to streaming services as a potential cause.
Yeah, I mean, you only watch, right, TV series that are good or are acclaimed, right? I mean, the TV runs all day, every day. No, Netflix is filled with the most unimaginable shit you have ever seen in your entire life.
90% trash. I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, Gaurav, come in.
I mean, I think there is most definitely a distinction between a movie and a film, and a TV show and a film. Sorry. Yeah. And I think the distinction isn't the spiritual definition and the feeling that you guys have been discussing, but as Jay pretty much hit the nail on the head, it's a very distinct commercial difference between the two, that a TV show is split into an episodic fashion, not necessarily narratively episodic, but it's split into different segments that are displayed in a collective seasonal grouping, and they're displayed on a TV channel, which is then interspersed with adverts, and that's how they make money, versus a film which is then released and you watch it in one sitting and you pay a ticket to watch it, and that's how they make money. And there is most definitely the distinction between the two in that commercial aspect. And as Jay said, that has divulged the two kind of, if you want to call them art forms, into two different ways, because the TV show's incentive is not instead to just make something really good, but it's just to keep you in the seat for as long as possible, watching as long as possible, so you can watch those 2-3 minute ad breaks every 15 minutes. Whereas a film, you could argue that the incentive of a film is to make a higher quality, most appealing film as possible, to get as many people to buy a ticket to watch it as possible. And Jay's really right when he says streaming platforms are changing that, because the incentive is now less and less becoming advertising reliant and more on a subscription based platform, which is much closer to a ticketing system that films use. So now, instead of producing something like Love Island, which is obviously, is just designed to have you sit there as long as possible to watch the adverts, instead it's now, do you want to pay this ticketing entry fee to Netflix to watch whatever supposedly high quality new TV show or film they've just produced.
Like The Crown or whatever. Then.
Like The Crown
Yeah.
or the Dark,
Yeah.
which is something big that's happening right now. Just whatever it is they're making. When they release a new film or TV show.
So will that change in model, i.e. the kind of ticketing system based on subscription to the streaming service? Do you think, Gaurav, that will increase the quality of a lot of TV shows? Right.
It will in the long run. In the short run, right now, it's because then you get into the idea of how films actually make money. And I did say it has to be good, but I also said it has to be popular. And as long as it's mass appealing, it makes money, right? There's tons of trash movies that make tons of money because it's just appealing. And Netflix is gonna work exactly the same way. That there's gonna be tons of shit on Netflix, which obviously no one likes and no one cares about, and it's bad. But they bring people in, they bring people to pay the money, and therefore they get produced. And that is going to be by and large the majority of the industry. The same with film. It's going to be the majority of the industry. But then as a byproduct, it does and will allow for better things to be produced of a higher caliber over time.
Jay.
Yeah, I think just to kind of draw on this idea of keeping people in their seats for as long as possible. I think one thing I found kind of interesting when we talk about Twin Peaks: The Return, I think this is kind of like the feature TV work in this kind of debate. But what's interesting about this is kind of David Lynch in this show. He goes like, I actually go so far to say he's on like a one-man mission to pretty much piss off the audience as much as humanly possible. Like, there's a lot of this kind of idea that TV shows, they try and, give you something nice where you can consume from your house, and they'll kind of give you something that you can keep coming back to every hour or every week. Kind of like, the stereotypical of like a soap opera with like the cliffhanger at the end, so you come back to watch the next like episode of drivel. And Twin Peaks is kind of different from that in the sense that there is you could watch an episode and you'd have really, other than it being good, there's nothing that makes you think, oh my god, I need to know what happens next, because frankly for most episodes nothing happens. And it's even to the extent that where things happen that kind of fulfill audiences' expectations, it's almost taking the piss out of other TV shows for kind of spoon feeding and cuddling the audience. And I think that's kind of what's interesting, is that this show for me does mark this statement that you can have a TV show that doesn't necessarily have to give everyone it doesn't have to give its audience, half an hour worth of light entertainment they can come back to comfortably week after week for the next 5 years indefinitely. Twin Peaks kind of isn't designed to be that. It's designed to be a challenging work that just uses kind of the medium of TV to give you a really long, hugely ambitious story.
I've got some really interesting questions about what you just said, but before, James, could I just ask you how you reconcile anyone really, because all of you mentioned it, how you reconcile your view of TV show as being essentially commercial with the aim of keeping people watching for the adverts, with the idea of something like the BBC, which obviously is a non-commercial, it's got the license fee. Does that make the BBC, or what is it about the BBC then that allows it to produce shows when it doesn't have that same ad incentive?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think this is a good way of distinguishing, because I think time is money, right? All TV shows are doing exactly the same thing as films do, which is that you have a resource, and you have to expend that resource, whether that be time or money, and TV shows are trying to compete for your time, right? So the quality of TV shows, even if TV shows are just trying to get you to watch the ads, it still isn't a reason why TV shows have shitty quality, because they have an incentive to make good quality material such that you spend your time watching them. I mean, it's exactly the same.
Yeah,
as
I mean, like
BBC.
Yeah, because my central point is the reason why I don't like the ad and ticket distinction is that the BBC still produces, doctors and daytime TV and still produces EastEnders, and it doesn't have any adverts.
Yeah, I mean, and Twin Peaks: The Return, right? Jay is just talking about that. First of all, I don't think Showtime has ads. Secondly, Showtime's a cable-based subscription model. So it's not like you just watch Showtime and you get given ads. You have to pay a shit ton of money a year to watch Showtime, which is what Twin Peaks: The Return was on. It wasn't on a conventional TV channel ever.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's no way. If this was on ITV, it would have been cancelled within an episode. But it's just, it's literally, it's designed to piss off the audience.
I mean, Jay or Gaurav, either of you, how do you respond to what James and I have said about a challenge to your kind of advert-based distinction, just because of the BBC, you know?
No, I agree. I agree with a lot of what James said. At the end of the day, it's just about making something to take people's time and take people's money. But then what Jay said about, what show was it that he talked about? Something with the cliffhanger.
Oh, just a normal soap opera.
Soap opera, yeah. That made me think of Killing Eve, the BBC TV show, which I watched season 1 of, and I really enjoyed.
Season 1 was good.
Until right at the end.
2 and 3 is
until right at the end when they had just the most boring cliffhanger to ever. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, this is just terrible. It's just ruined. It's just ruined a pretty damn good show up until that point.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think a lot of the incentives align between a TV show and a film to make something to get you to watch. But I do think there is a slight distinction in that because of the episodic nature of a TV show, that you have to be incentivized to come back a lot more often than you would with a film. You have to be incentivized essentially per episode to come back, which is not something that happens with a film, because when you pay for a ticket to watch a film, you've paid for that 2-hour block, that 3-hour block, and if you leave halfway through, no one gives a shit because you've already paid to watch it.
Yeah.
So they can put 1.5 hours of boring stuff in it and only half an hour of good stuff. TV show, if that 20-minute episode of The Office is not getting you interested enough to watch the next 20-minute episode of The Office, then it's failed as a medium and it doesn't, it's lost money.
I think one also interesting point is, in terms of kind of, the nature of the distinction, is if you talk about like a film like The Irishman, if you say, this is a 4-hour film, everyone's going to meme it and think, who the fuck's going to watch that? But if then Netflix went, oh, this is a 4-part miniseries starring Al Pacino and Robert De Niro,
that's very true.
Everyone would go and watch it. And it's like,
that's so true.
We do raise these points, but I think to an extent, the way they almost brand these things changes someone's ability or desire to watch it, to the extent where I'd almost think if I was making a really long film, I'd just call it a miniseries, and I knew that I'd get more people to watch it.
That is, I didn't realize just how true that is until I thought about it. How many more people would have watched The Irishman if it was just 4 1-hour or like four 50-minute episodes? It would have been so much more successful.
I mean, Jay, you mentioned earlier it kind of something that characterizes TV is the fact that they create content that makes people want to come and watch the same thing again indefinitely for a long period of time. This perhaps links to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, James has read the op-ed where Martin Scorsese attracted a lot of publicity for essentially saying that they're more. What did he say? They're more like theme parks. Theme park.
They're not real.
So I mean, that's then the film theme park distinction, is it? Although it has some aspects of TV that Jay described. I mean, James, having read the op-ed, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, it's really hard to talk about this, right? I mean, I think we're in a good position because we're a few months out of the fallout and there are more important things to care about in the world, right? But this was like nuclear territory. You couldn't talk about this without being... The problem is that like Marvel fanboys are like, infantile man children, and Scorsese fanboys are infantile man children. And they're both like so trapped in their like really stupid limited worldviews. And they're like so diametrically opposed, even though they're like, crucially the same. It's like Doc and Bigfoot from Inherent Vice last week. They're like the same person. They just don't realize it. So I read this op-ed because the Scorsese camp really gets annoyed if you don't read the op-ed. If you talk about it and you go, oh, of course Marvel films are films, they go, did you read the op-ed? And you say no, and they're like, well, you don't understand the nuance. So I wrote a little summary of the op-ed so that we can actually talk about it. Yeah. So what he said, these are all direct quotes. He said that Marvel films are closer to theme parks than they are as movies. This is because cinema is about revelation, aesthetic, emotional, and spiritual revelation, and it's about characters. He talks about Hitchcock. He says Hitchcock was our, meaning his age group's, franchise. And in a way, certain Hitchcock films are also like theme parks. But it's not the thrills and the shocks that we go back to. It's the painful emotions, or he's talking about North by Northwest, the lostness of Cary Grant's character. He says that Marvel has no revelation, no mystery, and no genuine emotional danger. They are sequels in name, but remakes in spirit, and everything in them is officially sanctioned. There is no risk and no individuality. And then he goes on and laments about how multiplex screens are too crowded with franchises. And his film, The Irishman, you get the vested interest here. His film, The Irishman, could only be made by Netflix, you know. And he says that people don't actually prefer Marvel films. If we showed them real cinema, i.e. his crappy Disney-esque film, The Irishman, then they would be more into cinema. You know what I mean?
I mean, my first reaction, sorry to interrupt you, is just that if Scorsese thinks all cinema is about revelation, I mean, he seems to assume that like 90% of the cinema industry, which is essentially just regurgitation of the same premises and films that have come before, doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Like,
I was like, where's the revelation in Scorsese's cinematography?
Not even Scorsese.
For decades and
yeah, I mean,
decades,
not even Scorsese cinematography, which a lot of people would say is on the upper end of just what's released in the world. Just more objectively, that like what we see, like 90% of what we see is remakes and revelations.
Yes.
I mean, just as
including Scorsese's own film, The Departed.
Yeah.
What I mean is that just as James said that, you know, prestige TV is a drop in the ocean. I mean, those kind of Paul Thomas Anderson, as we spoke about Inherent Vice, those kind of films are also like a drop in the ocean out of what's released every year. I mean, Gaurav.
Yeah, I mean, I did touch on that a little bit, which is it's very true. At the end of the day, if we're talking about the broad mainstream cinema film industry, it's just to make money, right? That's all it is to make money. I mean,
it's regurgitation the same way that he's criticizing.
And at the end of the day, you have to think about it as a risk-reward investment. That if I spend $10 million to produce this film, how much guaranteed profit and return am I going to get? At the end of the day, they've worked out it's just safer to reboot things which have been past successful, to include sequels of successful original films, to just start a franchise like Marvel, which is basically every film is an advert for the next film, and it's just consume a product and then consume the next product and the next one. And you just go on an endless train. And that's pretty much all it is at the end of the day.
Well, I mean, what I don't like is that that seems to be excluding, you know, just a huge chunk of the industry, which I know you might not like to watch them, you might not think they're high quality, but to say that they're not films at all just kind of puzzles me. I mean, Jay, you're not a fan of Marvel films. Where do you stand?
No, I think what Scorsese said is stupid, to be honest. It's such an arbitrary, weird distinction to say that it's a theme park, because it's almost like saying if a film aims to entertain you, then suddenly it's not cinema.
Yeah.
I mean, it's stupid.
Yeah.
It's
basing it off like subjective revelation, which how do you even measure it?
Well, it's like Mad Max Fury Road. In my opinion, that's a far more entertaining film than anything Marvel's ever made. I'm going to call that cinema. It's a great film. I watched it in the cinema, actually, funny enough. It's, you know, got very good production quality. It's a film designed literally just relentless action scenes for the entire 2 hours.
Yeah.
So I don't get how Scorsese could reconcile the whole, you know, Marvel's not cinema because it just entertains you. I mean, you know, I think Scorsese, if I'm gonna go into him completely, he made The Departed, which is a remake. It's a bad remake. The original film's much better.
What is the original? Can you talk just briefly about that for those who don't know?
The original film is Infernal Affairs. It's from Hong Kong. The production quality is much higher. It doesn't have the stupid, lazy ending where it zones up on a rat to show you that the film is about rats.
Right.
It's, you know, it's the plot's kind of slightly thicker. The twists come at you a bit better. It's a better film. It's a more interesting film.
I mean, just on that point, Scorsese, he did needlessly change pretty much all the good bits of Internal Affairs to make it worse. Like the police rat character, who's played by Matt Damon in The Departed, he doesn't have a character at all in Scorsese's film. And in Internal Affairs, he is quite literally the main character, crucial character in the film, who has a pretty twisting, engaging arc and things happen to him, which is just completely deleted and avoided and changed in Scorsese's films. It is quite literally worse.
Jay, carry on your...
You know, he's made Cape Fear, which is a remake. It's just a horror film. There's no revelation in there. It's literally just there to entertain you for 2 hours, unsuccessfully, but it's attempting to entertain you for 2 hours. You know, I just...
He remakes his own films.
Yeah, literally. Like Casino and Goodfellas.
Yeah, he does.
For Wall Street, what revelation is there in that? It's a 3-hour comedy.
I'd say that's I actually think that's a very... I think that's a good film, yeah.
I like
But
it.
where's the revelation?
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
exactly.
exactly.
It doesn't even fit his own kind
It just,
of.
to me, sounds like he's trying to, you know, it's almost like he's trying to promote his own film. It
Yeah,
just
he's
doesn't.
pissed. He's
There's
pissed
no-
about the Irishman.
Do you
As
think
in,
it was a
if you don't
classic-
know,
It's kind
Yeah.
of like, okay, so in school, I remember we did this discussion of what is literature. And our
Right.
teacher was like, oh, Twilight's not literature.
well,
50
technically
Shades
it's
of Grey is
not.
not literature.
Technically it's not. It's genre.
No, but you go like they go through this whole like, and they
No, but
start drawing
there's
these arbitrary.
It's different though. In writing, it's different because there's literary and there's genre, whereas you don't have that in film.
Yeah, I guess, but you get what I mean though. It's kind of like you're trying to make these signals of arbitrary
Quality.
classification on quality and nothing
Yeah.
else, whereas in
Yeah.
cinema that just doesn't exist. There's cinema is, you could say there's great cinema and there's not so great cinema. I think I'd probably agree with him that Marvel's probably not the best cinema.
I mean, just on that entertaining point, just quickly, there's plenty. Just also to refute Scorsese, there's plenty of very entertaining popular films which I think most people would consider to be really good, like Jurassic Park and Back to the Future, which are wildly successful films in their own right, which are they just entertain the audience. That's all they do. They don't really have any grand revelations of any kind.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as well, I think it's important to know that Scorsese really has like vested motivations for saying this because Paramount was supposed to make this movie, The Irishman, and they were supposed to make it for years. And then at a certain point, the actors got old, and Scorsese made, I mean, probably the most stupid decision in like, vaguely auteur-driven cinema of like I've ever heard. Is he really wanted the CGI, the infamously shit CGI. He really wanted it, and it was something like, don't quote me on this, it was like double or triple the budget of what Paramount had promised him. And Paramount told him to fuck off because they don't want to double or triple the budget for CGI. So
For a
then
4-hour film.
only Netflix would pay for it. And he was really, really, really angry that only Netflix would pay for it. And that's why he started saying this stuff. So he has a vested interest. It's not like he's just, coming at this from like altruistic, motivations. He's annoyed that Netflix made his movie.
I mean,
He also-
interesting. Sorry, Gaurav, but just interestingly, I think that I would have thought that Netflix were on the other side of the war from him, in that he's someone who wants to treasure traditional cinema, or Netflix is perceived by many to be a threat to the traditional cinema goer, the traditional ecosystem and model we have of releasing films. I mean, Gaurav, what do you want to say?
Well, I mean, in that just that vein of questioning, it's that's slightly different on the issue that Netflix just has billions and billions of money they want to throw around.
Yeah.
When they see a director that wants to make a movie, a well-known regarded director wants to make a movie, and everyone said no, Netflix is just they're just jacking off in the corner, excited to give them whatever budget it is they want to give them to do whatever it is they want to do, because they're just after the press in that regard. They don't really care if the movie is good or not. But then also on the Paramount point, Scorsese films, even his really good ones, don't make a lot of money at the box office. None of his films have ever really made a big return in other, compared to other, prestigious directors. They haven't really made that much of a splash in the box office. So understandably, Paramount is told to fuck off. Like, I'm not going to spend $300 million or whatever it is to make your 4-hour-long CGI'd old people film.
Yeah. No, fair enough. I just wanted to then cover in our kind of last topic the issue of perhaps interactivity, or whether films can be interacted with, issue of maybe games being films, or specifically Black Mirror Bandersnatch, is that an example of a film? James, what are your thoughts on that distinction?
Yeah, I mean, this is also, I mean, I think it's a really hard one because on one level, I'm happy to say that FMV games, I'm not sure what that stands for, but that's basically what you use to talk about something like Black Mirror, Bandersnatch.
Yeah.
There's actually a whole industry for it out there. It's just that obviously because Bandersnatch was on Netflix, it was much more talked about. I'm happy, I don't think it would be that controversial to say that's a film and that's a game, but you start getting into really difficult territory when people start calling like games like Death Stranding or Detroit Become Human or Heavy Rain. They start calling them films as well. And I had a bit of a think about this. I'm not sure on an exact defining line, but if I was to put one, I think it would have something to do with the level to which attention is put into narrative over gameplay, B, the attention to which sort of narrative supersedes gameplay in that the gameplay perhaps isn't particularly challenging, and see the attention to which, is put into acting and facial expressions and camera angles as well. Like, for instance, if we look at Death Stranding, it's like got 10 hours of cutscenes or something, which in itself is a pretty blatant sign. But in those cutscenes, what's really, really obvious is that so much attention is being put into camera angles and positioning and the movement of the camera, and it's just when you're watching it, it's just so obvious that this is trying to do something filmic as opposed to a much more obvious kind of game. But I wouldn't be comfortable in general with drawing a line that when something becomes interactive, it stops becoming a film.
Jay, you played quite a few games when you were younger, especially kind of story-based, quite expensive games like GTA or some of the COD games. I mean, what are your thoughts on the distinction between an interactive film and a film, or a game and a film?
Yeah, interesting. Actually, I played Heavy Rain, which is one of the film kind of games that James suggested. I think that's kind of an interesting one to talk about because going into kind of a bit more technical detail here, the controlling system in Heavy Rain is unlike any game I've ever played. The main controls are basically the only controls you really have are to choose where you walk. Every now and then there's some kind of fast action scene where you have to press along and basically control whether your character survives or dies. Also, if your character dies, they're dead for the entire film. There are 4 characters. They're dead for the entire game. There are 4 characters. Basically, the goal is to keep them all alive until the end. It's unlike any other game. You can't go back if you mess up. You can't go. There's level or mission after mission or whatever you want to call it, episode after episode, where pretty much nothing happens. It's just you walking around and interacting with the story environment. And it probably takes it took me about 3 days to play through the entire game. I mean, I could definitely see an argument made. I never thought of it as a film at the time. I always thought I'm just playing a game with kind of cinematic qualities to it. I'd probably still go towards that side and say it probably is a game with cinematic qualities. I think it's just it was an attempt to show that gaming can be kind of, a more artistic medium than people would necessarily say when you look at games kind of like COD, which are just, it's just an action flick. But I don't necessarily think that makes it a film. I think Bandersnatch probably is different because there's no controls or anything. It's just every now and then you choose what happens. You make these little choices, and the choices you make affect what happens in the film. Often you have to go back if you made the wrong choice and do it again and watch parts again. Because obviously you're not sitting there with your control, like with a game controller in your hand, and the control elements are very, very basic, even more so than Heavy Rain. So, I mean, I'd say it probably flips more onto the film side of the equation than the game side, whereas I'd say Heavy Rain or something like that toys the line into the game side of the equation.
I mean, fair enough. Gaurav, what are your thoughts?
I agree with quite a lot of what was said, but I do think there is a distinction in the sense that quite a lot of the games I've played, some of these filmic, like Heavy Rain I've played, I think Last of Us, another thing I would include in that category. These games, they do have a lot of cinematic quality and filmic quality, but at the end of the day, in my opinion, they're always still a game. And I think that's mainly because that when a game sacrifices a lot of its elements to go more down that cinematic route, something like Death Stranding, hiring only pretty well-known A-list actors to mocap all their cutscenes, the game loses intrinsically what makes a game versus a film. The fact that you are playing it with your own hands. I think a perfect example is The Last of Us. I don't know if any of you guys have played that film.
Yeah.
Played that game. Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to spoil it just in case anyone hasn't seen it. But basically, it's just a zombie survival game. It doesn't take very long to play. It's about 7 to 10 hours or so. But it's a very cinematic experience, and it's a very involved storyline, and you get very involved with the characters and that kind of thing. And when I was playing it, I just kept thinking the whole time that this would be just so much better as an actual film than a game, because at the end of the day, the game mechanics in the game were just basic and kind of boring. You just kind of stealth and you shoot and you kill a bunch of zombies, and that's really it at the end of the day. And the interesting part of the game is all in the characters and and the actual cinematic part of the game. So I think at that level, games are always going to be restricted in that the more cinematic they go down that path, the more part of the actual what makes a game is sacrificed, and what makes a game good is sacrificed. And in the Bandersnatch side, I think it does stand in a category of its own. I think it would be unfair to call it a film in a traditional sense, but then you can't call it a game either. It is really its own interactive, media. It's its own interactive film media, interactive TV media, where you are tapping the screen at various points to follow along a timeline.
I mean, James, could you tell people about Death Stranding? Because I've heard that's something that's quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously there are so many reasons why. So a lot of people who are there's sorry, I'm talking absolute shit. There's sort of two sides of the gaming community. There's like the casuals like me, and there's the hardcore gamers, and the hardcore gamers hate the casuals because the casuals want to turn games into cinema. Okay, so and you were talking about The Last of Us. The Last of Us Part 2 is even more, quadruple what you just said about The Last of Us. So Death Stranding is a game which a lot of the hardcore gamers didn't like because the gameplay sucks. Because essentially what you do is you just walk around Iceland. It's America, but it's Iceland for like 60 hours, right? And it's completely story driven. So there's like I said, there's like 10 hours of cutscenes. There might even be more. It might be 14 hours. And it's very focused on visuals, on music, on acting, and on story. And it's almost 0% focused on gameplay. I mean, it's almost impossible to die, right? So what it feels like to a lot of people is an interactive movie. And I know some sites such as IndieWire, Dave Ehrlich reviewed it, which is the first time the site's ever reviewed a quote-unquote game. And he reviewed it as a movie. So I guess the question would be, and I don't necessarily think an answer has come out of our discussion so far, if there is a dividing line, where is the dividing line? And if I was to put the dividing line, it's probably to do with gameplay. If the gameplay is like the point, if the point is that, it's like, say, look at Super Mario, right? The point is that you have to beat something, and maybe that beating that something is a challenge, then that's when you start tipping over the line, I think.
I mean, James, if I just may quickly ask then, because I agree with a lot of what you said. If you take Death Stranding, I haven't played it personally, but I've seen a lot about it and agree with a lot of what you said. If it wasn't a game and they just did the exact same thing, but actually as a film, do you think it would have been better?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think it's trying to aim at something. There's a particular, a lot of people who play it say it's really hard to explain until you play it, that like if you just watch someone play it, it might look really boring. But when you play it, it's almost like meditative. It's a really interesting experience to play. It sort of puts you in the zone. It's like an experience kind of thing. So if it was like a 3-hour film, yeah, I mean, if it was a 3-hour film, it would be probably not that interesting. I mean, it might be a little bit interesting.
Fair enough.
So it's almost like a Telltale game. It's like that kind of.
Not really. A Telltale game is more like Bandersnatch, except animated.
Right.
Because it's an FMV game, right? The only difference between Bandersnatch and a Telltale game is that you have to button mash during a Telltale game in order to stop from dying.
Right. No,
which is pretty much what happens in Heavy Rain.
Yeah, pretty much Heavy Rain or Detroit Become Human. It's by the same studio.
Yeah.
No, okay. I think that's really interesting distinction. I mean, I think we covered their differences between film and stage, film and TV. Oddly, because of Martin Scorsese, film and theme parks, and then film and when finally whether a film can be interactive. So yeah, I think we've covered a lot of quality material. Just like to thank you all for coming on. I found that really enjoyable, especially the Martin Scorsese section and Jay's evisceration of his 40-year career. That was good fun. But yeah, thank you all, and I hope you enjoyed that too. Just a quick reminder, we're on Spotify. Catch the link in our Insta bio on the Symposium podcast. If you go to our Spotify, the links to our YouTube and everything else are all there too. Subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Instagram and Spotify, and yeah, have a great day, and see you later on the film series from the Symposium. Thanks.
The Symposium with Aulak.